Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Christine Dixon of the Ordinary Sacred, and today I'm going to teach you all about exiles. Um, this is the next video in my IFS Basics Teaching series, which is basically little videos that are comprising my IFS 101 course. And if you want to check the course out, you can go to my website, theordinarysacred.com. It'll have more group sessions where people are discussing and asking questions and sharing about their parts as well. But today, I want to teach you about exiles, what they are, and why they are so important to um, what makes our system burdened and then how we heal our system. So in the last teaching video, I talked about how to gain access to the healing source inside of us, the capital S self. And so check that video out if you haven't, because that is really the core of how we heal and how we function and thrive in the world. Um, but in this video, I like the next teaching to be about exiles, not because that's the first part that we go to and heal. If you are familiar at all with the model of IFS, um, the one important thing is actually that to get to the exiles, we ourself goes through the protectors that protect them. But I like to teach about the exiles first because it helps you understand how and why the protectors gained their roles. And so hopefully that'll make sense. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. And then I think it's already big. Oh, great. So first thing I want to say about exiles is just in thinking about what that word means in English, right? An exile is a person who has been outcast. Like here's acceptable society, right? And someone is deemed unacceptable, bad, immoral, dangerous, or something like that. They've done something unacceptable to the culture. So they are exiled. They are brought out of bounds so that they are not interacting with the culture at large, right? And that's the same thing that happens in our systems when the exile is a part of us. You might think of like Jung's idea of the shadow, right? It's a part of us that was so unacceptable either to our caregivers or our tribe or culture that it had to be excommunicated. It had to be pushed either into our subconscious, even our unconscious, right? Just banished so that we can survive and function in our everyday life, in our culture, we can be accepted. So these are things like, for example, for my system, a really big thing that was exiled was my high sensitivity. I was called a crybaby. It was not okay for me to feel the very deep, rich emotion that I naturally felt. So the parts of me that held um, high sensitivity were banished. And really, the way my system did it, because it couldn't seem to really banish them, was it developed these really big inner critics that just constantly badgered any part of me that was highly sensitive to try to attempt to get it to go underground and just stop it, right? But there can be things like anger, right? Anger in me was because of my religious upbringing, cultural upbringing, was never okay. So the angry parts of me were banished. The parts that held self-love and self-value were seen as selfish. So that was exiled, right? For you, it could be even, qualities of self, like confidence. Maybe that's seen as prideful or something. And so that was squelched. Or playfulness, excitement, energy, right? Those things might have been banished. And again, the system is trying to banish those things to protect the system as a whole so that it can have belonging, right? This is kind of what Gabor Mate talks about, that we have to sacrifice our authenticity for our belonging. So a lot of times the exiles hold these beautiful qualities that are part of our authenticity, our natural playfulness, our natural confidence, our natural emotion, our natural needs, right? I have parts that were banished because they're too needy, right? And need to go to the bathroom when I need to go to the bathroom, to eat, to rest, right? So there can be parts of us that are exiled in that sense to help us survive and belong culturally. But then also, I'll go to the PowerPoint here. We can have parts that are stuck in a wounded state, usually some specific moment of trauma from the past, and need healing. So these kinds of exiles, like if we have a very traumatic moment, and it could be one big moment or it could be ongoing moments, right? But parts who experienced something that essentially cut us off from our sense of security, right? Something very overwhelming to our system that we went through and we felt alone in. We can have parts that are stuck back in that moment because they never got what they needed to process it, to move on from it, to have the fight or flight, perhaps, response move through their body fully. And so they're stuck in that moment in time and they're still feeling the terror, the horror, the helplessness, the hopelessness, the shame of those moments. And anything in our current environment that reminds us of those past moments will kind of make them start to come up. And that threatens the system, right? Because it just feels really overwhelming to our system to have that much pain and angst come up. So that's when, again, protectors will try to push them back down, or just really control our environment so that they never come up at all. A lot of our protectors are just so afraid of our exiles coming up because the protectors are young children too, and they can't ultimately help our exiles. But our capital S self that I talked about in the last video actually can. And so that's the beautiful message, hopeful message of IFS. But so we can have these parts that hold qualities that were deemed unacceptable that have been exiled. And we can also have parts who are just stuck in trauma moments that hold really big emotion. And it can overlap in the sense that if, say, we had parts that were highly sensitive, and then because of that, we were punished and hit every time we were sensitive, we've got trauma on top of uh, this part of us that's being exiled by our community, and now it's being exiled internally by maybe our own inner critics. And so these exiled parts are our most sensitive, vulnerable parts, and they're often our most punished parts that are kind of repeatedly abused in many ways. So because of all these things that these parts go through, the burden that they carry is their extreme emotion and their painful beliefs. So if you had a trauma where something horrific was happening in front of you, you witnessed something terrible, and that part is holding horror, right, or terror, that extreme emotion feels very big and overwhelming in our bodies, right? Um, it might be a sense of shame, which is basically, in my opinion, psychological pain, right? Shame is one of the most psychologically painful things that we can experience. So it feels very overwhelming. Think of it like pain in your body. If you have really intense pain in your body, it's so uncomfortable and you suffer from that. When you have a lot of shame, it's like this psychological pain that feels unbearable, right? And that this is what these parts are carrying. And so they can also carry very painful beliefs because of the very fact that they were exiled. They take on the belief, I am unlovable, I am unacceptable, I am bad, I am too much, I am not enough. Um, nobody can be trusted. My voice doesn't deserve to be heard, just a lot of things like that. They take on these beliefs about themselves. And the reason why they're painful is because they're not true. Um, and this is something that, spoiler alert, the self will eventually tell them, and the self will just reflect the truth back to them. No, you are beloved. Your playfulness, your sensitivity, your emotion, your needs, your anger, your sexuality, all these things, there was never anything wrong with you. And the reason why it's so painful is because it is not true. But those are the burdens that the exiles hold. And we are never, ever trying to get rid of a part, but we are trying to get rid of the burden that they carry, right? This untrue belief, or perhaps, and it's not even that we're trying to get rid of the overwhelming emotions. We're actually trying to, in my experience, what the self does is it lets them fully feel their emotions. It's not trying to stunt them and keep them down. It actually lets them release and complete the fight or flight response to their terror. It comforts them. It lets them know they're not alone in their emotion. It says, what is your emotion pointing to? What do you need? What did you need back there, right? And I can give it to you now. And so these exile parts are protected and suppressed by other parts, our managers and our firefighters, which the next few videos will go into depth about. And we've already talked a little bit about. But so again, the managers and the firefighters are trying to either control the external environment so that the exiles don't get activated, or they are trying to keep the exiles down through just suppressing them, numbing them, or criticizing them, keeping them down by brute force, willpower, right? Those kinds of things, managing them. And then once they come up, they're trying to push them back down, numb them, soothe them. And so a lot of the efforts of the managers and firefighters is all about trying to keep the emotion and the beliefs of these exiles down. And yet it doesn't work. They're trying so, so hard, and they mean well, but it just doesn't ultimately ever get rid of the exile or the exile's pain. So it's just a constant battle. All right. So I kind of already talked about this, but some examples of exile's burdens would be terror, humiliation. A lot of exiles can be around experiences of bullying or abuse, a feeling of helplessness, like you weren't able to fight or run, hopelessness, like there was just nothing that could be done, and they feel like there's nothing that can be done. There's no help or hope anywhere. Feelings of worthlessness. It could be pain of shame, or it could also be physical pain. A feeling of being abandoned or rejected. Those kinds of experiences by caregivers, peers can really create a lot of pain. And this belief that I'm unlovable, I must be worthy of abandonment, worthy of rejection, not worthy of someone staying with me and caring for me. So you can see there that they are, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing that. There's just a lot of pain with exiles. So now I want to be clear, I'm not trying to stir up your exiles in this video, because it is really important that we go through our protectors and we gain their trust before we go to exiles. Because if we go straight to exiles, the danger is that we're actually not in self, that we are blended with other protective parts who either hate the exile, disdain the exile, suppress them, dislike them, and so we won't have any any luck or any success in getting to know the exile. Or even worse, we will override the protectors, go to the exile, and the protectors will have backlash. They will get very, very upset. Um, and so then you can have dissociative parts, addictive parts, even self-harming parts that will come up in response because they're so afraid of releasing this energy of the exile. So what I want to just encourage you to do now is kind of just an intellectual brainstorm of, and you can kind of go through your life and just think in general, what are some of the, because you might see evidence of the burdens of some of your exiles, right? Like, what are some of the qualities that were not acceptable? Even if they're so suppressed in you that you don't even recognize them in you at all, and that's okay. But you can just think about your family of origin, maybe your religion, in school, education, your culture. What were qualities in other people that were deemed bad, unacceptable, worthy of exile, essentially? And just make a list of those. You know, sometimes you can answer the question, I would hate it if people thought that I was, and then fill in the blank. So a big one for me was selfish. I would hate it if people thought that I was selfish, right? So the parts of me that valued me, took care of my needs, um, were exiled in me because that was considered selfish, right? Or if people thought that I was, promiscuous or something, right? So those are maybe some of those sexual parts that are exiled. Or if they thought that I was mean, right? So it might be some parts that hold anger and healthy boundary and assertiveness. Um, or it could, so I encourage you, you can even pause the video if you want and just brainstorm what are some of the things that you got the message were unacceptable. Um, and then you might also brainstorm some of the messages. Again, it's not that maybe your whole system deals with it, but in the times when you feel the most vulnerable, what are some of the beliefs that you might feel like I have about myself, but it's really certain parts have about themselves of I'm too much, I'm not enough, I'm unlovable, I'm not worthy, people will always abandon me. It's generally about yourself or that part, but it can also be about the world, right? That people are untrustworthy. The world is a very unsafe place, right? And these parts come by those beliefs very honestly. And for now, I would say just keep those kind of on the side, and we're not going to do anything with them for a little bit because in the next teaching video, we're going to really get to know the parts that have developed in your system to protect those parts or protect you from those parts. And as we get to know them, they will actually very naturally lead you to the exiles. And you don't even necessarily need to engage your intellectual thinking parts to try to figure anything out. They will tell you all about themselves when your protective parts make way for that, when you're in self energy and you're feeling just genuinely loving and curious toward them. They will tell you everything, and yourself will be able to fully witness and reparent them and retrieve them and unburden them. So, if you have any questions about what an exile is and or what their burdens are, or you want to add anything to my description of exiles, go ahead and put that in the comments below.